At some point in your 50s, something shifts. The invitation arrives, a party, a dinner, a gathering of people you know well enough. And instead of the mild excitement you might have felt 20 years ago, you feel something closer to relief when you have a reason to decline. And when you don't have a reason, you find yourself wishing you did. Most people watching from the outside will call this getting old, or antisocial, or letting yourself go. But the psychology of people over 50 who don't want to go out points somewhere else entirely, towards something that looks less like retreat and more like arrival. Let's start with what's actually changed, not in their circumstances, but in their self-knowledge. There's a particular kind of understanding that only comes from having lived in your own mind and body for several decades. You learn over time what actually restores you and what depletes you. Not what's supposed to restore you, not what worked for other people. Not what you assumed would be good for you, but what actually observably leaves you feeling better or worse than you started. For a significant number of people, the honest answer to that question turns out to involve a lot of quiet, familiar surroundings, control over the pace and texture of an evening, the specific kind of ease that comes from being somewhere you've arranged exactly the way you like it, with no social performance required. Psychologists who study introversion and energy dynamics have found that people differ substantially in how they process social interaction, not in terms of enjoying it, but in terms of what it costs them and how they recover. For people on the more introverted end of that spectrum, social environments draw down a resource that needs time and solitude to replenish. And crucially, the awareness of this tends to increase with age. Younger people often override that awareness because the pressure to be out and engaged is enormous. By 50, many people have simply stopped overriding it. But this isn't just about introversion. It's about self-knowledge more broadly. After 5 decades of trying things, noticing how they felt, and updating their understanding of themselves, these people have a clearer picture of their own operating conditions than they've ever had. They know what a good evening looks like for them. They know what a draining one looks like. And they've accumulated enough data to stop pretending the second kind is worth the cost. There is also something worth noting about the specific guilt that often accompanies this preference, because many people in this group feel it. Even when they've made peace with the choice itself, they know they'd rather stay home. But they also carry a faint sense that wanting to stay home means something is wrong with them. That a fully engaged, fully alive person would want to be out there. That the preference for quiet is a symptom rather than a disposition. The research on this is actually quite clear. People who spend time in environments that match their genuine preferences, rather than environments they've chosen to meet social expectations, report higher well-being, lower stress, and a stronger sense of meaning in their daily lives. The guilt is a cultural artifact, not a psychological signal. It's the residue of decades of messaging about what an active, engaged life is supposed to look like. And for people over 50 who have started to question that messaging, letting go of the guilt is often the last step in fully owning the preference. Now let's talk about something that the research captures precisely, because it explains why the social life of people over 50 often contracts in ways that look like withdrawal, but are actually something quite different. The psychologist Laura Carstensen developed what she called socioemotional selectivity theory, a framework that describes how people's social priorities shift as they age. The core finding is this: as people perceive time as increasingly finite, they naturally redirect their social energy. They move away from the goal of expanding their network, meeting new people, maintaining broad social connections, keeping options open, and toward the goal of deepening the connections that already matter to them. This isn't decline, it's optimization. And it happens, Carstensen found, not because people become less capable of social engagement, but because they become more honest about what they want from it. For people over 50, the math on many social outings simply doesn't work the way it used to. A large gathering requires significant energy, the noise, the surface-level conversation, the navigation of a room full of people you know to varying degrees, and the return on that investment is often modest. A few genuinely good exchanges, maybe. Mostly the satisfaction of having shown up. Contrast that with an evening spent with 1 or 2 people they actually know well, or with no one at all doing something they actually care about. The depth of those experiences, the quality of what's actually exchanged or experienced, is categorically different. And people who have stopped pretending otherwise are simply being honest about a preference that has always been there, but has become clearer with time. The social circle didn't shrink because something went wrong. It got more precise because something went right. It is also worth saying something about what these people's evenings at home actually look like. Because the assumption is often that staying in means doing nothing. In reality, for many people over 50 who have stopped going out routinely, home has become a genuinely rich environment. The books they've been meaning to read, the projects that require sustained attention, the cooking they actually enjoy, the conversations with the people in their household that don't compete with noise and distraction. These aren't substitute activities for people who couldn't manage the real thing. They're the real thing for people who finally stopped pretending otherwise. The third piece of this is the most practical and the most grounded in lived experience. After 50-plus years of going out, these people have extensive data on what going out actually produces. Not in theory, in practice. They've attended the obligatory work events and the birthday parties for people they barely know and the neighborhood gatherings that seemed like a good idea in the afternoon and a mistake by 9 o'clock. They've sat through dinners that were fine but forgettable, parties that were loud in the wrong way. Social commitments they agreed to 3 weeks out and spent the intervening time mildly dreading. They know what that experience is like. They know how they feel driving home and how they feel the next morning. They've run the experiment enough times to have reliable results. Psychologists who study how preferences form over time describe this as experiential wisdom, the accumulation of real-world data about what actually works for a specific person in specific situations. It's not cynicism, and it's not giving up. It's the opposite. It's taking your own experience seriously enough to let it inform your choices rather than overriding it in deference to social expectation. When a person over 50 declines an invitation and stays home instead, they're not avoiding life. They're applying what they know about their own life to make a decision that reflects their actual priorities rather than inherited assumptions about what people are supposed to want. A quiet evening at home, doing something they chose, at a pace they chose, in a space they've made exactly the way they like it, isn't a consolation prize for people who couldn't manage something better. For many people at this stage of life, it's simply the better option, not by default, by deliberate comparison with everything else available. So let's be clear about who these people are. They are not isolated. They are not depressed. They are not people who have given up on connection or decided that life isn't worth engaging with. They are people who know how they get their energy back, who have refined their social lives toward depth rather than breadth, and who have enough lived experience to know, clearly and without apology, what actually makes an evening worth having. In a culture that still treats going out as the default measure of being alive and engaged, these people are living by a different and more honest standard, not a lesser one. Staying in isn't giving up on life. For some people, it's finally living it on their own terms. If that resonated, leave a comment. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'll see you in the next video.